Good morning. I'm delighted to be here today to join in this wonderful TEDxExeter event. And I'm particularly pleased to be here today because I have a particular reason for being here today. So for the last 40 years of my life, I have really been thinking about this concept of a sustainable way of life. And I have to be honest, there have been many points in my life where I have been very close to despair at just how difficult it has been to demonstrate the benefits of a genuinely sustainable way of life. But I am a long way from despair today, I'm happy to say, because for the last 18 months of my life, I've been working on a new book about 2050, about how we get to be living in a sustainable world by 2050, and what it will take to actually make this journey from where we are today to where we need to be. And I've come to one simple conclusion: a genuinely sustainable way of life is still available to all of us. Now, the big word there is all. And by all today, as you know, we're talking about 7 billion people today. By 2050, we will be talking about 9 billion people. Now, as far as I'm concerned, after that point, all bets are off in terms of the availability of a genuinely sustainable way of life. And it still astonishes me that the majority of environmentalists and all the major NGOs in the UK today are still utterly indifferent as to what happens if this curve goes on up, crashing through those barriers. 9, 10, 11, 12 billion people. You name your insanity threshold. Now, as we know, population is just one of the big issues we face. I'm going to touch very quickly on 3 others. Firstly, on the whole question of oil. This, as we know, is the story since 1979, the oil shocks in the 1970s, a combination of rising demand. Rising population means that the price of oil has shot up here. This is where we are today, in the middle of one of the most serious, if not the most serious, economic recession since the 1930s. That is our reality on the energy front today. The same is true on commodities. We face a similar situation on commodities. Jeremy Grantham's work demonstrating that we have prospered so much during the course of this century because of the cheap price of commodities. And now the price of commodities is rising all the time, again in the middle of one of the most serious economic recessions since the 1930s. So what we're in the middle of now today is really a huge resource crunch, not just on oil, but on food, and we'll hear a lot more about that today, on food security issues, and on critical things like rare earths. This is the world's largest rare earth mine in a province in China. Rare earths are not actually rare, by the way. They're just difficult to get hold of, and more than 90% of them are currently mined in China. So we are already seeing these limits to growth materializing in our lives today. And on top of all that, of course, we have the problem of accelerating climate change. Most climate scientists now would acknowledge that 2012 was a real annus horribilis, the worst year ever in terms of the feedback loops in natural systems, demonstrating just how quickly the climate is becoming very unstable indeed. And for many people, that is something that demonstrates the need for profound change. Yet in reality, we are still on a complete business as usual track. That little sum of money, $523 billion. That is the calculation done by the International Energy Agency, demonstrating the total amount of money that governments around the world made available to fossil fuel industries by way of subsidy, by way of taxpayers' money. $523 billion still supporting fossil fuels at a time when we know we have to go in the other direction. And even climate scientists are quite nervous about making explicit links between what is going on in the climate and these kind of horror stories, Hurricane Sandy style horror stories. Now, my friends tell me that Hurricane Sandy has had a very big impact on the opinion of people in America, which is hardly surprising when you think of what the price tag is for Hurricane Sandy, $62 billion. Now, I suspect, like many of you, I fear that we're going to need to see a lot more Hurricane Sandys at an even higher price tag before politicians really wake up to our destiny, the only way in which we can make sense of this stressed out world, which is a process of radical decarbonisation, taking carbon out of our economy at every available point. Now, for me, when I look around the world today, and there is a lot going on, what I see is a world in rehearsal. It's like we were preparing for this process of radical decarbonisation, preparing both in theory and in practice. In theory, for instance, we have amazing studies now. This is a brilliant piece of work that I do strongly recommend to you, done by WWF and a little consultancy called Ecofis. And what they have done is to look at the transition available to us over the next 40 years, through to 2050, as we move away from the second industrial revolution energy sources, coal, oil, gas, and nuclear, towards the energy sources of the future. So you have all the grey bits here, the coal, the oil, the gas. This little black bar at the top, that's nuclear. And rest assured, colleagues, if a genuinely sustainable future means anything at all, it means a non-nuclear future. A non-nuclear future. And as you can see, we gradually see a tailing away of all the grey and the black bits into this multicoloured wonder zone. The green, the blue, and the yellow, made up of solar, of wind, of bio, of geothermal, a little bit of wind, a wave and tidal thrown in there for good measure as well. Now, interestingly, from an economic point of view, this transition from the grey to the multicoloured represents, of course, trillions of dollars of new economic value as we migrate from the one to the next. It's going to be a period of astonishing change, and that is already happening in our midst. You can see it in the rich worlds. We begin to understand the power of solar energy. You can see it in developing and emerging economies, particularly for communities that are not connected to any central grid system. And most of this is down to one particular revolution, almost as uncommented on as the rising commodity prices, is the plummeting price of photovoltaics. This is a little curve taking us from 2001 to here, 2012, showing the price of PV in the US and in Europe. And what you can't see is we're on our way down to this magical threshold here, the $1 a watt threshold, the grid parity threshold, where a unit of energy from solar costs no more than the same unit from coal, oil, gas, nuclear, whatever it might be. And we are well on our way to that. In some countries, we are already at grid parity. And the Chinese manufacturers who are responsible for this amazing story, I'm happy to say, are not really content with $1 a watt. All the talk in China at the moment is how quickly can we get down to 50 cents a watt. It doesn't even appear on this graph. 50 cents a watt is a revolution in our midst. How long will it take? I don't know. 5 years? 7 years? 10 years? It doesn't really matter. It is literally just around the corner in terms of the technologies available to us. And beyond that, we know that when countries get serious about this, we see integration. This is Germany. Germany is not just doing solar, not just doing bio. This is an anaerobic digestion plant, of which there are thousands in Germany. We're lucky if we have a few here in the UK. Not just doing wind, but joining the whole thing up, making it into an integrated system. And that's going to become a lot easier. And I'm now going to show you what I fear may be the most boring slide that has ever been presented at a TEDx conference anywhere in the world. Is this the most boring slide? Because this is just a cross-section, a tiny cross-section of some of the storage technologies that are being invested in now all around the world. In the US, in China, in Japan, big time after Fukushima, in Germany, here in the UK. Big new investments going into storage. And why? Because you cannot net the full benefits of renewable energy without proper storage systems. Welcome to the world that now awaits us. This is me here, standing next door to someone called Dr. Nawal Al-Hosni, the director of the Zayed Future Energy Prize in Abu Dhabi. And we are standing next to one of the parabolic troughs that cover 1,200 kilometers in the desert in Abu Dhabi. It is the world's largest concentrated solar power plant, commissioned just 3 weeks ago at the inauguration of the new government of the United Arab Emirates, who all chose to bring their new government into being at this astonishing facility. Is that surreal? Possibly. Is it symbolic? You bet it is. Because this is where the world is going. And that is really the most exciting thing I can offer you today. Some people call this the Third Industrial Revolution, the title of Jeremy Rifkin's wonderful book in which he exhorts us all not to give in prematurely to apocalyptic despair. Because if we get this right now, we are on the way to something breathtakingly different. He calls it the energy internet, where electrons move through our energy systems as easily as bits of information move through our electronic information systems today. And that's the real power lurking in the wings here, the permanent, ongoing internet revolution, the so-called Internet of Things. 50 billion things connected up using smart information systems by 2020. Even more excitingly, 5 billion people, at least 5 billion people connected to the internet by 2020. It is the world of hyper-connectivity. So think for a moment about 5 billion people crowdsourcing solutions to problems that we currently think of as being intractable. This innovation pipeline is why I am now not in despair, why I feel very excited about what's actually happening, because in every field of what I call here pro-sustainability endeavor that makes for a better world for all 9 billion of us by 2050, in every field, that innovation pipeline is absolutely bulging. Now, I'm only going to give one tiny insight into that today, and that's in the world of water purification. This is a technology that happens to come from Unilever, Hindustan Unilever, introduced to the market 3-4 years ago. House scale, home scale, very domestic, not cheap, but certainly affordable for a large number of citizens in Southeast Asia, India, and elsewhere. Since then, all sorts of competitors have brought their products to the market. Big companies like Tata and P&G, small companies bringing new ideas to the market, all with one intent in mind, which is how do you bring the service of water purification into people's lives at a price they can afford to relieve the world of the scourge of illness and death caused by polluted, contaminated water. This is an innovation story that is just growing and growing and growing. Somewhere in a lab, somewhere in the world today, some bunch of really bright innovators are working out how to use a straw so that when you put the straw in a glass full of polluted, contaminated water, between the point where you suck the water up into your mouth and the point where you swallow it down, that water will be completely purified. This is going on right now. Nanotechnology makes a lot of these things possible in a way that we could not have imagined before now. So this innovation pipeline is absolutely bulging. And this is how I see it, really. This is where we are. We are still in an extraordinary race. A race between what I've called here the accelerated deployment of the third industrial revolution, of dramatic, exciting technologies in every field of human endeavor. And on the other hand, the dog days, the dying days of the second industrial revolution, the fossil fuel revolution that, of course, brought untold benefits to human beings, but now threaten us with Hurricane Sandy lookalikes at every turn, bringing countries, perhaps even whole civilizations, to their knees. Now, that's the race we're in. But the most important thing is, it is a race. There is still time. It is not too late, however many times you hear people say that. And technology lies at the heart of that potential. Now, I have to be honest, I still find it a bit surprising to hear myself uttering those words. over the last 40 years, if I'm being absolutely candid, I have been no great fan of technology. Indeed, I have often been very skeptical, critical even, of the phenomenon known as techno-fixing, where people choose to proselytize the astonishing benefits of technology, partly in order not to confront the deep structural, economic, and philosophical issues that lie at the heart of our corrupted model of progress. A form of technological escapism which has served us ill over the years. And as you will all know today, we have a completely new cohort of techno-fixers in our midst today. Environmentalists who have, if you like, chosen to prove their newfound faith by viciously attacking environmentalists themselves, by accusing the environment movement of naivety, by attacking us for our belief that the precautionary principle is still quite a useful way of protecting us against the worst excesses of technology, of accusing us of blindness to the benefits of the technologies that they themselves have so gullibly fallen in love with, namely nuclear and GM. It's quite difficult to make the case for technology when people think the only case to be made is for nuclear and GM. And I guess that is my big nervousness, that I might get caught up in that sort of techno-fixing illusion, which is why I have left this figure hanging here in front of us all this morning. $62 billion was not only the cost of Hurricane Sandy, it is also the total amount of revenue that President Obama will be able to claw back into the US Treasury by cancelling the tax reliefs that his predecessor, George Bush, made available to the richest of the already obscenely rich in the United States. By cancelling those reprehensible, immoral, wicked tax reliefs, $62 billion back to the US Treasury, $62 billion. So here's the story, really. I think it's relatively easy to make the case that the prospects for humankind depend absolutely now on this third industrial revolution, on radical decarbonisation. I think it's a lot harder to make the case that the prospects for humankind depend equally, absolutely, on a radical redistribution of wealth, on a political and economic revolution, as well as a technology revolution. Without that, no amount of technology breaking through is likely to build a genuinely sustainable society for all. So that's my simple conclusion. Yes, I actually really do believe this, that a brilliant, genuinely sustainable way of life is available to all, just so long as we bear in mind that sustainability is at least as dependent on equity as it is on technology. Thank you.